Hello, I'm Corinna Harrod, and this is the Monday Night Review. Hello, I hope you're all well. Happy Halloween. I want to say a big thank you to everyone for your lovely messages on John Benet Ramsey. It's a really difficult case to do because it's so horrifying, but also full of legal pitfalls. So I really love hearing that you enjoyed it. Also, a little reminder to our Patreons that there is a forum on Patreon where you can chat about stuff. I can't start a conversation there, but you guys can. And I'd love to know your thoughts on this case over in the Patreon forum. So in this episode, we're talking all things Halloween. It is Halloween today, and these stories have been gathered over the last few weeks, but news from South Korea in the past couple of days have been absolutely horrifying, with over 150 people dead and around 80 injured in a crowd crash and stampede during a Halloween party. This makes it difficult to talk about Halloween in a light-hearted way because of the devastation these families must be going through. Everything else seems a little bit trivial, but I know that listening to other people's podcasts, some of them deeply inappropriate, have got me through some really difficult times when I needed to escape. And in that spirit, I'm forging ahead with this episode. It is a real tragedy, and I'm sure every listener feels as sad and horrified as I do for the victims and their families. Halloween, of course, isn't meant to be associated with spooky, horrible chainsaw murders and everything that we kind of think about today. It is a ritual celebration with roots in the determination of farmers to protect their families and livestock, and a few pagan ceremonies and rituals. So that's where we're going to start today. My children, my three boys, are absolutely obsessed with Halloween. I spent the whole of Halloween in labour with my first child. I woke up at 9 minutes past 12 with my waters breaking, and didn't have him until the 1st of November. So for me, it is a strange day where I think, God, I lost a whole Halloween. I was supposed to be going to my sister's house for dinner. My sister is obsessed with Halloween, so we've always grown up doing stuff. So yes, for me, it's a bit of a strange day, and my son is convinced that his obsession with Halloween stems from the fact that he spent a lot of one of those Halloweens trying to get out of me. So yesterday I took the dogs for a dog walk. I had a really busy work day yesterday, and I took the dogs for a dog walk and came back. Oh, in fact, no, I went riding my horse and I came back, and my husband had very amazingly decorated our kitchen. The kids were obviously supposed to help, but they were by then ensconced in front of a Halloween movie. They've carved pumpkins. They've perfected their gruesome Halloween makeup. And so we're fully ready. I'm podcasting under a flying broom. So if you hear a massive thump, that's probably what it is. For me, it's, although I love Halloween and I love spooky things and I really love autumn, it's part of the slog to the glorious finish of the 5th of November, which is secretly my favourite. Yes, one of my three dogs is absolutely terrified of fireworks, and yes, they are questionable for the environment, but I really love fireworks. And I love fireworks night, and for me it means their Halloween and the eldest's birthday have been successfully achieved and ticked off, and nobody in my family loves the 5th of November quite as much as I do, so it feels like I'm allowed to celebrate it rather than having to facilitate other people's needs. But I'm here, if you can hear a dingling. Those are my spooky spider earrings. It is a lovely autumnal day here, so I'm hoping the weather holds up for trick-or-treating later. Our house in London overlooked a park, actually, where we had a huge fireworks display, and we could sit in the bedrooms and watch it from the window for free, with a glass in hand, baby all clean and cosy, and the sleeping bag on my knee. Though, of course, there was that one time that the dog ate all the spare icing from the birthday cake, vomited extensively on the bathroom floor, bedroom floor, and then the sofa. And I had such bad morning sickness that we ended up just having to literally push the sofa out of the window and wait for the council to come and pick it up, because I couldn't be anywhere near it. Now, I digress. This episode, we're going to be talking the history of Halloween. We've got a few scary listener tales and some of the things that are less cool about Halloween. Some of the things that have slightly taken the glimmer off Halloween for us by turning it from pretend scary into really scary. Believe me, I've left out the majority of these horrors because basically I was doing some last bits of research and my husband was like, "You look really depressed." Yeah, it's not a good thing to be researching true crime on Halloween. There's a lot of it. So Halloween originally is a day dedicated to remembering all those who've died, including saints or hallows and martyrs. Some theories have it linked to the pre-Christian Celtic harvest celebrations such as Samhain, whereas others have it as a Christian celebration before All Hallows Eve on the 1st, or All Hallows Day on the 1st of November. As with many other Christian celebrations, a lot happens the night before, and the word Halloween is of Christian origin, meaning Saints' Evening. Now, Irish and Scottish immigrants took their Halloween traditions to North America, and I think it's safe to say that the Americans have taken it and run with it. I've been to America twice, only once as an adult. Believe me, I would really like to rectify this. But we were lucky enough to be invited to a wedding in Washington at the end of October. I think it was the 26th or something of October. And so I'd never been to New York before. My husband had lived there for 6 months, but when he was much younger, and my mum had never been to New York before. And so we were like, let's just go to New York for a week before this wedding. So we spent a lovely week in New York. And then we got on the train to Washington, and we had my eldest with me. He was just about to turn 1. And I just had these memories of walking up and down the streets of Washington, not the Washington that I'm used to from the West Wing, but like suburban Washington, going up and down these streets with my eldest in a pram and my mum, and just looking at all these incredible decorations. Now, I've always thought that one thing the US do really good is their like streets of houses, or what we would have as housing estates here. The houses always seem to be a really good size, and they have really nice front and back yards, whereas here you can get like a postage stamp house with a square of patio in the back, and people expect you to pay millions of pounds for it. But it was just amazing to see all of these houses with their decorations on there. Like, they had proper American porches and front yards, and there would just be like cobwebs and decorations and pumpkins everywhere. And it was just, I hadn't even thought about it before, because obviously traveling with a 1-year-old and all the stuff you're going to see in New York, and then you think about the wedding, and I hadn't kind of computed that we were going to Washington near Halloween, and it was so amazing. So anyway, it's not just the name and celebration of Halloween where the Christian Celtic traditions converge. For Celtic pagans, Samhain means darker days, the end of the harvest, and the arrival of Ishi, which symbolise the presence of spirits and fairies that actively provoke the protection of God when approaching their home. So protection meant ensuring the survival of the family and their livestock. And so it was this sort of idea that you would put gifts out for the fairies to protect your house. The harvest was over, the hard work of the farming year was over, and it was time to kind of hunker down as the days got shorter. The Samhain festival includes bonfires, apple bobbing, fortune telling. Bonfires were said to cleanse and prevent souls from the dead from entering earth, and they were also believed to keep the devil away. So there's a reason for everything. People would dress or disguise themselves in costume, called mumming, and go door to door reciting verses or songs in exchange for food. In some cases, the food would be left out for the dead as treats for if they returned home. So you can see there's loads of different traditions that are kind of very similar, but not necessarily at all from the same background. Originally, this all looked a lot like the Christian act of souling, which is the giving and receiving of soul cakes in return for prayers of the dead. So souling would be often those of the poor. I think the Christians finally came around to the idea that, leaving food out for the dead is probably better to give it to people who need it. And those in need would knock on doors and offer prayers for the dead of the family in exchange for soul cakes. So over time, mumming involved dressing up in any type of disguise, and souling was a big thing for Catholics who believed that you went to purgatory when you died. So anyone offering to pray for the souls of your loved one was definitely worth baking for. The disguises also started off very differently from what we know them to be today. I'm still very old-fashioned. I don't want to see a kid in a Freddy Krueger mask. My kids have sleepless nights from the people that have told them about Pennywise. I've got a zombie. I've got Victor Frankenstein from Frankenweenie, and I think I've got Rocky Balboa. He's very changeable, the little one. He wants to be Rocky Balboa. Again, probably not appropriate for a 5-year-old, but there we are. So a particular favourite early on was for choir boys to dress as virgin brides, which kind of seems sinister to me. But I think it was to bring good luck looking ahead to those getting married and producing babies for the Christian community in the future. So soon the whole going to houses and getting treats became less about the adults as it had originally been, the adults going house to house and offering prayers, and it became more about the kids, less about the praying and more about earning your treat. So the kids would do a trick for their reward. They would be rewarded for entertaining the screen-deprived homeowner with a song or a poem or something like that. It was never actually a trick in the way that we have it now. It was not supposed to be about egging houses, pranking your poor neighbours. You were going to perform the trick and be rewarded with some kind of sugary goodness. Pranking actually only came in around the 1930s as a form of entertainment, bored teens wanting to jazz it up a bit. It's more fun to destroy your neighbour's property than to recite a poem, I suppose. But there are some areas where the damage done went into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's in the 1930s and 40s. Obviously, the Second World War put a bit of a damper on things. There was sugar rationing. Chicago, I believe, banned Halloween celebrations altogether. And so that put a bit of a damper on it until rationing was over. Now, it is believed by many that us Brits don't like Halloween. It's not strictly true. It's been celebrated here for a long time, just in a more British way, with parties and wholesome fun. Agatha Christie's book Halloween Party was published in 1969 and is one of my recommended reads for this time of year, unless of course you've cancelled her, in which case you can skip it and I'll read your quota's worth because I really like it. However, we didn't really trick or treat in Britain until the 1980s, and I never did as a kid in rural Hampshire. My sister was obsessed with Halloween, so we would always decorate and celebrate with friends. She had another friend who was obsessed with Halloween, so we'd take it in turns to host parties. The grown-ups would get involved. But yeah, no trick-or-treating. Now, to be fair, I was into spooky stuff and true crime from a very early age. So you wouldn't catch me going round to a stranger's house in the dark, knocking on the door and asking for stuff. No, thank you. Seemed crazy to me then, and frankly, I find it fairly horrifying as I accompany my Halloween-loving children to do it today. It's actually one of the reasons I have so many kids. You can't trick or treat with a baby, really, so I stay home while the baby sleeps and I hand out sweets to the rowdy kids with my dog standing very close by should they get any ideas. A survey in 2006 found that 58% of homeowners in the UK turned out the lights and pretended to be out for Halloween. I did this when I lived in London when I was in my early 20s, I would lie on my bedroom floor, smoke weed and read a book by torchlight, hiding from the sugar-crazed London teens that would navigate their way to my door. It wasn't particularly gritty, but like after about 7:30 in Shepherd's Bush, you would get kids arriving on your doorstep that are bigger than you. And, I was terrified. Now I've spawned my own troop of Halloween door knockers. So I just get dragged around feeling incredibly anxious. Also, Halloween costumes. If you're an anxious parent, lots of Halloween costumes are dark, and my kids do not want to put on the dogs flashing in the dark collars, which I think they should wear. So for me, it's just quite a lot of like panic. Can anyone see them? Should I illuminate my child? My mother's friend parboils Brussels sprouts and then coats them in chocolate and delights in watching the little blighters pop these into their mouths. So that is tempting. So today, Halloween involves trick-or-treating, costume parties, carving pumpkins. I've discovered that birds, including ducks, love raw pumpkin seeds. My ducks are taking a little while to warm up to the raw pumpkin seeds, but it's really good for their gut. So if you're trying to reduce your pumpkin waste, pumpkin seeds for the birds, not for hedgehogs. It's what they give to hedgehogs in hedgehog rescues if the hedgehogs are constipated. So you'll cause real hedgehog problems for the little ones that are trying to put on weight before they hibernate. So don't just leave it out. Put it somewhere that the birds can get it and the hedgehogs can't. Lighting bonfires, apple bobbing, divination games, playing pranks, visiting like haunted fairs or haunted houses, telling scary stories, and watching horror or Halloween themed movies. My Instagram's feed was full of my friends going to Halloween parties last weekend. I feel more than usual, but perhaps it's a lockdown kickback and everyone is so happy to be able to properly go out and celebrate that there's just been a lot of, maybe I just had 2 years off and I wasn't expecting it. I was not invited to any, which is actually a relief. My husband cannot say no to a party invite. We know that I've already explained that this time of year is stressful for me. So some Christians will still attend church services and light candles on the graves of the dead on All Hallows Eve. Historically, they'll have abstained from eating meat on All Hallows Eve, which is a tradition reflected in the eating of certain vegetarian foods on this day, including apples, potato pancakes, and of course, eating soul cakes. Now, I had a look up of soul cakes. They sounded rather delicious. My friend gave me a recipe for it's called a remedy for recovery, and it's basically like this delicious hot chocolate drink that does instantly make you feel better. It's got spices in it. And I thought, well, maybe a soul cake will go with my recovery remedy, and I will just be floating around. They are sort of like a spiced biscuit, but unfortunately with raisins or dried fruit in it. You lose me. Once you put raisins or dried fruit in something, I'm out. So I may make them without the dried fruit, because a spiced butter-based biscuit would be quite good, I think. Halloween is nothing really to do with spooky things. Yes, you are praying for the dead souls and all of that, but not necessarily thinking of them as returning from the dead in a spooky way. But then the New England Puritans, yes, those who were responsible for Salem witch trials, decided that Halloween is an unholy celebration. They do not like any fun. This and the increased Celtic emigration to America and their love of all things fun, party pranks, and disguising has led to it being the $1 million holiday it has become today. Interesting, the concept of Halloween was introduced to the Russians when the Soviet Union fell, and children were being taught English and being encouraged to learn English, which if you speak Russian, I think English must be very confusing. And I know that my friends who speak Russian, who may be really good at other languages, it's tricky. So they are encouraged to read about American Halloween traditions as a way to improve their English. It's no surprise that they took this idea and really ran with it, and now it's really popular in Russia, particularly in nightclubs where there are parties and costume contests held, and it's kind of like a big deal for the youth, the older youth. But it means that over time, with Halloween movies and people wanting to be more and more scared and modern technology, Halloween's become kind of overshadowed by death and murder and grisly stuff. But before we get into that, let's have our first listener tale. So this is from Justine, who, when I was asking people for listener tales, she sent this in, and this is prime. You know how you grow up and your parents make you feel a bit silly if you get scared about something? I love this story. So back in the day, my grandparents lived in Africa and wanted my dad to have a proper education. And as they were Quakers, they sent my dad to the Friends School in Saffron Walden. So whilst he was at this boarding school in the 60s, he and a friend were walking into town down Peasland Road. And in front of them was this little old lady. They started to run into town behind the old lady when they realised that despite running and covering ground, the old lady was still the same distance away from them. They ran faster, still no ground made. Eventually, the old lady turned a corner into Debden Road. My dad and his friend ran to the corner where they saw the old lady still the same distance ahead, only for the first time they noticed she was floating along. She had no legs. I love it when that sort of thing happens and you have a friend to have a witness to something. There's a friend of my husband's and I saw something with him, not scary, just funny. When I must have been, at least 15 years ago. And even now when we see each other, we're like, God, do you remember when we just looked at each other and realised we're the only two people who'd seen it? So I love that it wasn't just Justine's dad. He had a friend. They both saw it. They're forever united in having seen something. And also this all took place in Saffron Walden, where he wasn't from, but now his daughter lives, completely unconnected. So I think it's a really nice link. Now back to the scary things that happen at Halloween. And it's only in the mid-20th century that Halloween becomes associated with murder and violence. It's ideal to blame books and films and media, but it's also proved that there's an increase in crime at this time of year. So that's not going to help its reputation. I'd say that's probably down to it being really handy to be able to wear a disguise so no one can tell what you're doing without looking like a complete weirdo, or absolutely horrifying. Any other day of the year, if someone walked down my street in a clown costume, I would have an absolute meltdown. But I'm fully braced for having to see a clown at some point this evening. There are a couple of really horrendous stories of people either having completed suicide or having been murdered and mistaken for Halloween decorations. A woman had been brutally beaten and her body was then discovered near a fence line in Ohio, and people saw this body and just assumed that it was a decoration that had been put up by children. This is in 2015. It's not that long ago. And so for ages, she remained there without being just properly identified. There's also the terrible murders that the movie Scream is based on. I have a very low tolerance for horror movies and scary movies. I'm a bit wet that way, but I've seen bits of it and it's horrendous. And it's slightly more horrendous to know that that is based on a real event. And since, murders have been done by people wearing the Scream mask, which must just be horrendous. So Halloween is also associated with some urban legends. There are definitely some Halloween urban legends, which would of course come out if you've got a load of kids knocking on doors asking for sweets. But now we come to the mother of them all, poison Halloween candy. Now, my annoying husband told me very dismissively that poisoning candy had never happened, and it is an urban legend, which of course it is in a way. But actually, a child has died from eating poisoned Halloween candy. But it wasn't just random. As the urban legend says, There's just an evil person in the street who wants to get rid of the kids. That has not happened. What did happen took place in Texas in 1974 with Ronald Clark O'Brien lacing 5 pixie sticks with potassium cyanide. He opened the tops, poured in 2 inches of cyanide and then stapled them together because he planned on killing 5 local kids, including his 2 children. Why? Well, he was deeply in debt and had taken out life insurance policies on his children. And so he needed to collect that. And he's clearly mentally disturbed. Who the fuck does that? There's lots of people who go into debt, manage to not murder their children. His son, 11-year-old Timothy, ate his cyanide-filled sour candy when his dad suggested he could have something before bed. His dad also gave him a lovely drink to wash away the sour taste. It had enough poison in it to kill 2 people, and within an hour he was hospitalized and declared dead. Luckily for the other 4 children, including his 5-year-old daughter, they had been unable to get past the staple that he'd used to put it back together, and fast-acting local detectives had recognized the smell on Timothy's breath as potassium cyanide, tracked down and confiscated the other pixie sticks before they could be eaten. And the fact is, A, they could trace who had given them the pixie sticks, but B, random murders of children is very rare. On the 31st of March 1984, Ronald Clark O'Brien, dubbed the man who killed Halloween, was put to death by the state in Huntsville, Texas, and as the lethal injection was being administered, a crowd of 300 locals shouted "trick or treat" and threw hard candy at a small group of anti-death penalty protesters. People are weird. And of course, there have been a fair share of celebrity deaths on Halloween. In 1926, Harry Houdini died from peritonitis. They suspect it was caused by receiving multiple intense blows to his abdomen, which usually he could handle. But in fact, he'd injured his ankle, so he received these blows while he was lying down. So he, at the time, said he wasn't able to brace himself. And although he then went on and did a performance, he passed out several times and was eventually hospitalized. River Phoenix famously died of an overdose at the Viper Rooms on Halloween in 1993. Sean Connery, there's nothing creepy except for perhaps his treatment of his wife, but he died on Halloween in 2020 in his sleep. So listener tale 2 comes from a friend of mine who is an embalmer. And this segues very smoothly, obviously, into our second listener tale, which comes from a friend of mine who is an embalmer. I cannot tell you how much peace she has brought to me, having answered questions for me that had really bothered me after the death of my father, and completely changed my view of wanting to sort of not think about that aspect of things. She asked to remain anonymous, so we'll call her M. And her advice to you is to use smaller company funeral directors. Avoid the big ones. M says, I used to work nights when the kids were small, as needs must. I was in a local funeral director's at about 2 a.m. and I had my back to the door as I was finishing up dressing someone. I thought one of the guys had been called out as I saw him out of the corner of my eye walking past the door and going to the loo, but noticed he was wearing a red baseball cap, and he waved, I waved back shouting hi, but thought an hour or so later, it's strange he didn't come in to say he was going away. I finished up, walked to the front door and realised I'd left my keys in the door, so nobody could have come in. I ran off but called them the next morning to have them check the CCTV, and they had seen nothing apart from me freaking out and running to the door. They then said, did I go into the viewing room next door, which M hadn't, and they said that in that room there was a young guy laid out in a black suit with a red baseball cap, and that really freaked me out. M says a few other people have felt things but that was my scariest. One mortuary is in a converted court, and I used the cells in the basement, 4 cells knocked into one room. The lights and power used to cut between 2 to 3 a.m. and that was horrible. So I'd have 5 to 6 people around me in the complete pitch black. I'd like to give a big shout out to Em for doing a job that many of us couldn't, and she does it with such care. And I remember her a couple of times saying to me, I love my job. And she loves her job because it's caring for people when their family aren't able to. So I really appreciate all the embalmers out there. And that is it for our Halloween episode. I always want to hear your listener tales, so do just send them in. I hope you have a lovely Halloween. It's actually timed very well because I did want to have a bit more of an upbeat episode after the last 3, which have been fairly grueling. So whether you're trick-or-treating, having a party, lying on the floor reading a book by torchlight whilst the kids think that you're not there, have a wonderful Halloween, and I'll speak to you in November. You can always send me an email, themondaynighreview@gmail.com. You can find us on Patreon, where you get extra stories and mini-sodes, or in the case of the last couple of weeks, you have got episodes early. So the patrons got the John Benet Ramsey's part 2 and 3 early. And you can find us on social media. We're basically the Monday Night Review everywhere. Come and find us, say hi, and until next time, be kind, stay safe, and always check the back seat before you drive.